everyone, my name is Fabrizio Fortunato. How's everybody today? Good. I know that I'm standing for your coffee, so I'm not going to be that long anyway. But I'm here. I've been working in Ryanair for the past 7 years, and I survived actually the redesign of the website twice. So I've been here. Is the clicker not? That's okay. Okay, I'll do it with the arrows, it's fine. Yeah, I'll be here today to tell you how not to launch a modern website. What does it mean is that we managed to launch a website and without anybody noticing, actually. Nobody ever told us or even thanked us to say, hey, there's a new experience in Ryanair and you release something new. So, but first, let me set up some context. In 2015, this is when we released what we call the Ryanair 2.0. This was a big redesign of the website, big infrastructure changes as well. We went through an API-first approach. We introduced a lot of new functionalities like My Ryanair to manage your user profile, and also we reduced the number of clicks necessary to go to book a flight from 17 clicks at that time to 5. Now, this change now is not 5 clicks anymore. We went back to that decision, but things are changing once again, so I see that there is a cycle in there. What it was, the Ryanair 2.0 was 2 years worth of development of a website. It was a big website. It was a big media coverage. There were articles, radio interviews. Michael O'Leary was going in the radios to tell about how great it was, the new website. And how we release it. We had a big bang approach. We had set up a deadline, and we didn't meet it, of course. Like 2 years worth of development. When you have something so big, I would like to hear stories actually from you guys. If you had something that big, that has to be, it has a deadline and it has to be released up until a certain date if you meet that date. Because we didn't manage. We tried everything, cutting scope, ignoring low priority bugs, putting up overtime. Didn't work. I think we were short about 2 months, probably. This is what it took us to get actually live. And if we analyze it, what was the Ryanair website? It was a single-page application from a front-end point of view, of course. This is my area, a set of front-end. It was a single-page application, monolith single-page application built in AngularJS. And what you see in here, this was the release process that we had, and it was followed at the peak by 12 teams. So 12 teams were working in the front end on a single code base, and were following all this type of release process in here. And what you see is basically the dev environment, three test environments: dev, SAT, OAT, and prod, then production, of course. So when a new feature or new change will arrive, we'll start from dev. You have the unit test, then you're going to build and deploy and QA. After you finish, you're going to SAT, similar process, just you're adding the end-to-end testing at the end. Everything looks good, you're going to OAT, and finally, you're getting a little bit of sanity in there. If everything is fine, you're going to prod again, build and deploy and sanity. Guess this is no different on what the release process looks like, right, from other companies. But what this process generates? Well, it generates release trains. Think about all the steps that you have there as train stations. Your train is stopping by and is going through all of these train stations. And the train is going at a fixed schedule. You have to release this feature for this date. So what happens is, it's not waiting for you. You end up doing 2 things. You're either pulling out changes if they're not ready, or you end up delaying everybody that needs to arrive to their destination, right? That needs to release. This is exactly what was happening to us. It was one release process, 12 teams going through this, and countless time I remember removing commits, because they weren't ready, they weren't finished, they weren't fully tested, or just delaying the release. So that's why in 2018, we were tasked to revamp, redesign the website. And the focus was on personalization and also on performance as well. But we were also asked, can you work on releasing multiple times per day? Because we didn't have that possibility. We were generally doing few releases per week at that time. So this was a big challenge for us. We understood the benefits, of course. Fast feedback, reduce risk, increase predictability. This is all the second way, the third way the brand basically was saying also before, right? So we accepted the challenge to try to put a stop to the release trains. Just take a little bit of water, sorry. What you see here is the timeline on how we released the Ryanair 3.0 website. And we started in 2018. Actually, Jerry was a big part of this process as well at that time. And we're still going through it now. Nowadays, didn't have enough screen to put other pages in there. But what we did was basically we took an iterative approach. We slice out each pages of the website into their own, what I call micro pages or microsites, and deploy them, work on them and deploy them separately, completely in isolation. So each team owns one or multiple of those pages, and we kind of put them in between the 2.0 website and the new website. So the user was basically going back and forth between the website, but this gives us the possibility to release something more iteratively. So we started with the flight select page in 2018, September, and we're going all the way up. We finish off all the potential booking, what we call, which is basically your look to book, your initial booking screens, and now we're working to the managed booking as well. What we put is a modern architecture and infrastructure also in there. Our last bottleneck was actually the release process itself. This is a quote from Jim King as well. And how we could improve the release process without compromising the quality. The first thing that we started looking at was understanding the release process. We started value stream mapping, and we tried to put cycle time and value added time to each of the steps in here. So what we notice is that even the similar steps across the environments were actually taking different cycle times. We discovered actually that this was down to coordination in the end. So while the whole team was ready to go and work when something was merged, was ready in development, it wasn't the same on SAT. There were dead times in between, and people were switching tasks, and this was basically adding up cycle time in the end into the release process. We also noticed, this is quite obvious, of course, steps are in series in here. So if you sum up the build times, unit test times that you have, you're basically waiting 1 hour just for this to happen across the environments. Let's put up a simple scenario. 8 working hours, and you want to release something. 4 hours are going for QA. 3 hours are going for QA, more or less, and you got 1 hour of build and deployment. This leaves you 4 hours left. So what happens is, if you have something that goes wrong in the process, some bug that you need to fix, you cannot release that day. You cannot make the changes. You cannot go through this process once again through that day. So this was our first step, actually. Mapping out everything and putting times on it. So what we worked on is what you see in here is the new release process. And there's a few things that we introduce. So the first one is, thanks to the micro pages that we had more parallelization. We didn't have these big release trains across that everybody had to jump in, but rather it was like smaller trains that each team will have for each of the pages, right? Then we remove one environment, development. Nobody checked it now. It's just a playground for developers at this moment. So we don't use it that anymore. We move the unit test to have it on pull request. So we are not having unit tests run on development branch or a master branch merge, saving a little bit of time in there. And then the last one, what you see in here, we are building on each environment in parallel. So this includes the test environment, SAT and OIT, and also production. How does it work? When something gets merged into master, build and deploy goes through all the environments at once. Production as well, because what we did is we separated deployment from release. So we now have the possibility to deploy, but to not release in production. What does it give us is that, as you see it in here, everything happened in parallel at the same time. There's no waiting times. If a QA, for example, needs to test out starting from SIT, it can jump straight away to OIT, and then it can go to production as well to test it out. It doesn't have to wait for a developer, oh, can you please deploy it into this environment? He can work out on his own. So actually, going back a little bit, what you see in there, in the production, there's a launch darkly toggle box, and I'll explain now how does it work. This is basically how we differentiate, how we release in production. So what is happening? We are using launch darkly, which is a feature toggle service, to toggle the version that the user will receive it. So imagine on the right-hand side, what you see is an S3 bucket, is basically how we version our application. We have these several versions. Each time we have a new build, there's a new version associated with it. And with launch darkly then, we specify and we select what version the user should receive. So that's how we separated basically deployment and releases. We are deploying every time new version, but only when we go into launch darkly and we select that version, the user is allowed to see it. What is a feature flag? Well, in the end, it's a code functionality, right? You're checking something, you're enabling something or disabling something. This is generally how it's used. In our case, instead, a feature flag is basically attached to each of the micro pages, and the versions, the variations that you see in here are determined in launch darkly. So each variation of the feature flag is a version of our application, right? And what it gives us is the flexibility also to, for example, release on different markets. So not releasing at the same time everywhere. What we generally do, one thing that we're using a lot, is releasing to all except the top 12 markets, and then releasing to the rest. But also another option that it gives us is percentage rollouts. We want to test out only on 10-20% of our traffic, and then progressively increases. We can do that now, thanks to launch darkly. So if we compare where we started in 2.0, our cycle time was around 5 hours, and now in 3.0, we have a cycle time of 2.5 hours. So that's basically half the time. And what we did was basically reducing the waste along the process, and we can now release multiple times per day. So, but why we were obsessed on this, why we worked a lot on this? Because another quote from Gene came, until code is not in production, it's not generating any value. And this is one thing that we are really obsessed in Ryanair, which is generating value for the company as well, and for the customers. We didn't stop there though. We introduced now, this is basically a few months that we are starting a trial on this one. We introduce now a new release process which we call the Express. We are looking all the time towards continuous delivery. This will be our goal. And in an industry where risk is not taken lightly, the airline industry. So it's kind of difficult, we are getting there, but we're taking some small steps. So what we did in this express release process is that we removed the manual steps that we have along the way. You see it in here, there's no more QA, there's no more sanity being done across the environments, which means, and it translates to, when something gets merged into master, if it's marked as a release commit, this just goes into production, basically. There's only actually two manual steps, which is we have a changeover approval board, so we have to go through a CAB approval process, but that's generally taking very little time, like 5 to 10 minutes. And the next manual step is just triggering, basically, on launch darkly, the version change. For this trigger, to speed up this version change, we develop also, for example, a bot. This is using the Launch Darkly API, and what is it doing is, when a new version is available, we send a message into one of the Microsoft Teams channels of the team, where the senior developers can just click a button and trigger a release directly from Microsoft Teams. There are, of course, some checks in place that we put. For example, we check that a CAB is open, is approved before actually the trigger release can take place. And of course, if all goes well, you got a successful message, you can check up your CAB, and you can also roll back directly from the bot itself if there's some issues. Now, comparing once again, we got our standard release process in here, which is taking the 2.5 hours. We are now using it for bigger features, more corpus, let's say, functionalities. While with the Express, which is 45 minutes, we are using it for, at this moment, is low risk changes, UI improvements, common component improvements. We're probably looking through the year, or through next year, to bring it more and more for other functionalities as well. Because what it gives us also is that with such a small cycle time, it gives us the possibility to break down bigger features always. We want to break down bigger features in smaller and smaller features to be released ASAP. And also using Launch Darkly in there, even if you have a bigger feature, what we started to do is hiding this feature within a flag and only releasing it once everything is ready. So you can go into production even if a feature is not ready. You just hide it behind a flag. That's what we're doing. So I'm closing then with the same question that I got asked from our management. Can you deploy and release multiple times per day? Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the first question. When you were measuring you mentioned you didn't put up like on the slides the waste. Mm-hmm. You fair enough, you called out cycle time and value add time. But how much and what were the wasteful pieces that you took out?
So the first thing that we put while using value stream mapping that we understood was that we were repeating steps across. We had a setup with, for example, development and master. These were two branches that we were using, which were going development or on SAT environments, and then from SAT onwards we were promoting on master, right? So we were duplicating steps between those two. This is one thing that we realized. And then I think, as I mentioned, majority of the waste was down to synchronization within the team. So it was kind of difficult to have all the people jumping when something was ready. So a lot of the times what was happening is the QA will start their work, or the developers will start their work and then focus on something else, while there were waiting times, like that we've seen, for example, the build and deploys and so on. These were waiting times. So a developer or a QA would just, okay, I'll switch to do something else in these 15 minutes, for example, right? But generally, it wasn't stopping at 15 minutes. They were, once you start something, this was taking up maybe 30 minutes or an hour. And what that means is that they weren't ready straight away to test out a functionality when it was deployed on the other environments. And this was adding time in the end, because, as I mentioned, we have only 8 hours through the day to make a release. So if you take up 30 minutes here, 1 hour there, considering also the different time zone, we have 4 offices now in Europe. Different time zones, it means some people are getting up earlier and leaving up earlier. So that was, for me, the biggest waste was actually coordinating the team.
Yeah, and just as you talk as well, if engineers are constantly context switching, their productivity drops.
Yeah.
Finish what you start kind of thing before you go on to the next thing. So if you're constantly sort of toggling between tasks, you're just going to lose productivity. Yeah, got it.
There's a question there, yeah?
I have a question. So you shrunk the whole cycle time from 5 hours to 45 minutes. That is great. So when the product goes to the customers, did you do some form of correlation between the customer's feedback and before and after to see that you're pushing that load onto the customer feedback team or customer success team? We're getting more bugs and more change requests now. Was there any?
So one thing I forgot actually to mention, very good question, that this new express release process, it's only available for teams that have enough end-to-end test coverage and enough monitoring in place. This is one important piece I actually left out. So we need to have these quality gates before actually going, so not all the teams are actually going into the express now. There's only a selected teams that meets those criteria. But regarding the feedback, no, we haven't necessarily seen an increase on bug, but what we've seen is that we are faster to respond to any of the changes that might happen, like within the company, within priorities as well. So by following this process, it means that generally the team that are following it are more up to date to changes that are basically changes of improvements that are across the common components that we have, so UI changes and so on. But they're also faster on reacting to change of priority, change of within the business. So we can better suit if something is not working correctly, for example, we can quickly switch. Since we have such a short cycle time. The customer feedback, we use it. We started doing, thanks to LaunchDarkly, also A/B testing more. It was kind of easier since we had this tool to do a lot of the A/B testing as well. But I wouldn't say that there's a correlation with bugs or issues that are being raised with that.
So you were not getting more change requests after changing this whole process. You were still getting the same amount of change requests from the customers than you were before.
Yeah, actually, our biggest factor was starting having more coverage of end-to-end by switching to this one and having to meet these quality gates. You have a better quality built in the team. So actually you have less of that because the engineer feels even more safe, more trust on what you're doing because they have a lot of these quality gates. Yeah.
Sorry, it's a quick question. I can see how your value stream mapping is working, and I can understand how you measure the route through the stack, if you like, or how do you measure the value? That's not giving away a trade secret. Well,
the first thing is what we're trying when we distinguish between the value added and the cycle time was, okay, we know for some of the steps like build and deploy and so on, we were measuring basically, okay, this is what we think is the minimum time that it needs to run, and the lead time was basically time wasted maybe in doing other stuff, right? From a technical. I wouldn't say this is just an approximation. Like we're not measuring the value of each of the functionality, but it's rather the value added that we think. While speaking, a lot of these value stream mapping, how we did it was basically interviewing all the different teams and try to see how they were working and trying to collaborate with them. What generally, on average, a ticket will take to resolve for a QA, or a ticket would take to resolve for our developers. So that's how we did it. It wasn't like, exact value, like the number that we put in there was just for us as a reference how to try to improve it and to try to track it.
I have seen where value is being measured, because the first time it was used in production by a customer was a measure of the value, which could be 40 minutes after it's released. So I was just curious how you measured it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you see that process filling down to, say, some of the lower levels of the stack? So obviously you work at the front-end UI, but in middleware or even lower levels of the stack, is that same process trickling down, or is it different for those?
It is different. I think our focus was a lot on trying to release as fast as we can, and was kind of, I have to admit, also was a little bit easier. We did a lot of these architectural changes, which are similar to microservices, for example, for applied to front end, right? So, and the fact also that sometimes, not a lot of the times, but sometimes UI changes and so on, they're kind of low risk or less risk compared to, for example, backend changes. They are starting also the other teams, the backend teams, especially. I think we took the lead on using Launch Darkly on our side. I see now the backend teams started introducing it more and more and more with their functionality. So they release a new functionality and they use it toggle off, for example, reducing the risk all the time. They are starting to build more end-to-end testing baked into their pipelines. They're thinking a little bit more. They're probably 1 or 2 years behind compared to us. We took the lead in here just because, in our case, was okay. We have to redesign the website. Let's put ourselves down to understand how we can improve this whole process. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that was hurting also was, okay, customers' feedback, which was very important to get these changes out quickly, but also the developer experience was quite important to us. Like all in here, a lot of the times the developer will have to be frustrated, go back through the process once again just because a bug was there. While in reality now, with more quality and with faster feedback and faster processes, also the developer experience improved a lot. Yes?
My question's linked to what the gentleman just said there. So in terms of measuring the values, where are you getting your insights for, like how long it takes for how many abandoned requests you're getting from users? How long is it taking for a user to complete the purchasing process? Where is the customer's price point? Are they toggling them to a certain degree and trying to determine that? Is that something that you're measuring in terms of your value? Is that something that is in the developer's mindsets, or is it something that's managed by a certain?
Yes and no, as in, I think the whole thing is not only the developers, especially for tracking up if a new functionality is bringing value or what value is being added. It's more difficult. Unfortunately, this is one we're trying to get better at this one, to get visibility and to get a better understanding for the developer teams as well on into this. But in reality, there's a lot of factors that impact. This one is not necessarily that easy, let's say, to track the engagement improvements on or less abandoned cars or anything, any of the KPI. There's a lot of factors that are external factors that actually impacts those KPI. We notice there's events, marketing campaigns, can be anything, right, that can impact. So we are a little bit slower on that side. We'll take probably, generally it's 1 week or 2 weeks of collecting data, getting insight, and then take the decision. This is from bigger feature. For more technical features instead, performance improvements and all of that, we have a little bit more control on our side. We know what are those KPIs straight away, or for smaller features that are impacting one page only. Because one thing to notice and to remember is that on the Ryanair website, you are in a flow. So each decision that you're taking within that flow might impact some of the features that you are releasing. So that's why I'm saying it's not that easy to just say these had an impact on a plus, I don't know, plus conversions of 10%. It's not that a clear cut. We try to test it out, as I mentioned, on smaller markets to start with. This gives enough traffic, enough confidence to start, and then progress to the bigger markets. So it is something that we are trying to work more. We are getting reports on a weekly basis, basically on how the features are going, how they are performing. I would like, my vision would be that we'll start to get daily reports on and actually bake them into the KPI, into our KPIs also, this type of metrics. We're getting there. It's a slow process. For the moment, we have from a development we have a certain KPI that we try to meet. Marketing or sales will have a different KPI, for example, that they need to meet.
You mentioned your releases are generally low risk. What volumes were you able to move into that space, into your reduced cycle time? Mm-hmm. And maybe have you balanced then the challenge for your business not to be more? You know, how does that, how did that all work out for you?
Well, so we managed to get, I think a team can do probably like five releases, probably like easily per day. On different pages, majority of the times they will go and do 5 releases per day. Now, what we're trying to do is, it's very difficult to say what are the low risk and what are the high risk changes. What we're trying to do is more often now is to hide that complexity behind feature toggles. So we know that, and one of the issues that we have, one of the challenges that we have is that generally features, majority of the time, will span across multiple pages. So one of the things that we did is migrating into these micro pages, right? They are separated, but now we have orchestration to take into account. So what we're doing is just creating feature flags per feature, hiding them, and trying to basically release on top of that, knowing that everything is off. Everything is off. Only when everything is ready, we turn it on. So that's the approach that we're trying. It's difficult. The business wouldn't say what's low risk or what feature is high risk or like how long does it take or not. It's down to us then to actually breaking down smarter.
So the business experience is just, it varies. Yeah, based on the complexity.
Yeah.
Just one last question, and I know this is very, very rare, but how do you manage failures?
Mm-hmm. So there's no blame attitude. That's the first thing. Is failures happen at any degree, at any time, and that's a very important thing that the team needs to know and feel comfortable, because otherwise. What we notice is if you put too much pressure on the teams on not failing, they won't get these things. You want to be fast. You want to release fast. So that's the one important thing. And the second thing is depends on which failure. What what do you mean by failure? So if there are errors, if there are KPIs that are impacted, user customers are impacted, then I showed, like in that slide, you have the rollback button. You just roll back. Okay, it happens. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's see what is happening in there. Let's analyze it and stop there. One thing actually very good that we noticed since we have this process is that before, when we had failures which were minor failures, for example, so not vital to the application performance, let's say, we try to fix forward a lot of the times, which generally what was happening is some customers, maybe or some experience was impacted, right? But you were accepting it for maybe half a day, 1 day or 2 days. With this one instead, we don't care. Roll back and then you figure it out straight away because it's just that easy to roll back and make changes. So that's the one more from a technical side. So we have KPIs on, for example, the big one that we have on front end are, of course, conversions, page views. It's very, with the traffic that we have, actually, page views is quite a good metrics for us because it's telling us there's a problem on that page. People can get through, so the page views are dropping. This is the example. Now, from business side, because there are failures from features that they failed because they're not great, for example. In that case, it's always try to work out with an MVP approach. So try to make like really a minimum viable product, get it there. If it doesn't work, okay, you wasted just a little bit of your time rather than wasting 6 months, 12 months building something that the customer don't want. And we had experience of functionalities that we released, and after 2-3 months, nobody was using it. Boom, into the trash bin.
So in the nicest way possible, it's safe to say that failure is a part of day-to-day work.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, there's no more question. Thanks a lot.